Kate Bell, Head of Economic and Social Affairs at the TUC, and John Longworth, who was Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. That is until he resigned last year to campaign in support of Brexit. Welcome to you both. John Longworth, first of all, is this kind of what you expected to happen, that there would be a certain period, given how the markets reacted to the referendum result, where investment would be lower than it would otherwise be, and that in a sense that's kind of the price we have to pay in the short term to get what you think will be the benefits longer term?
No is the short answer. It isn't the price we have to pay. Three things. One is that the Bank of England have not got a good record of forecasting in any event. The second thing is that actually this sounds a little bit like Project Fear all over again. We've got the Bank of England, the Treasury Department, the CBI, all working off the same models and all trying to preserve a poorer version of what we have at the moment in concert with each other. When in actual fact, let me answer the third point, which is crucially important. In actual fact, the many things that are actually bearing down on our economy at the moment can be resolved by the Chancellor. And it's actually the incompetence of the Chancellor in relation to Brexit that's the problem. Because the one thing I agree with Mark Carney on is that business confidence is down. And what the government need to do is make it clear that they're embracing a new model economy after Brexit, reducing taxes, boosting the economy, rather than simply trying to preserve a poorer version of what we have now.
We can talk about some of the options ahead in a moment. Just to be clear about this, the Governor said, for example, that the fall in sterling was, in his view, referendum related. And he said it's not my judgment, the bank's judgment, the Treasury's or anyone else or the politicians. It's the market judgment. And therefore the market has made kind of its own judgment on this. So in a sense, isn't that the point he was getting at? And that these consequences flow from the market's judgment?
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, what he's doing is characterising the fall in sterling as a bad thing. In actual fact, the fall in sterling has led to a boost in exports and a boost in UK manufacturing and a rebalancing of the economy towards the regions, which is very important.
Let me bring in Kate Bell there from the TUC. Do you accept that actually quite a lot of this has had very beneficial consequences at a time when the economy wasn't exactly booming ahead anyway, that the cut in sterling has actually opened up new capacity?
Well, I don't think you've seen that boost in exports yet, but what you certainly have seen is a squeeze on real wages. We've seen the money in people's pockets fall for the last 2 months in a row, and the bank is predicting today, and it's not just predicting it, but it is reflecting what's going on at the moment, that as prices rise, wages are not rising to keep up, and people are seeing a squeeze on their real incomes. Where I do agree with John is that there is a real role for government here to step in. I think Mark Carney made that pretty clear as well. It says in the inflation report that the government's continued austerity policy is having an impact on real growth. And I do think the question now is, given this gloom, given the impact on households' real spending power, what is the government going to do next?
Right, and let's pick up on exactly that point then, because that's something John Longworth was talking about as well. What do you think the government should do?
Well, I think there's two things the government can do. We do think that continued uncertainty over Brexit is affecting economic growth, and it is affecting, as the Bank of England said today, businesses and decisions about whether or not to invest. They're picking up real uncertainty from businesses. So I think some real clarity, and I don't think we've had that yet over the transition period, is important. But then we think government can step in, by saying that it is going to pick up some of this investment. We're not seeing investment coming from businesses. We could be seeing it from government. So,
So an infrastructure kind of investment.
An infrastructure package, but also taking the action that it can itself to boost real wages. We're seeing the public sector pay cap increasingly affecting real incomes of millions of public sector workers across the country. That's a pretty simple step they could take to boost wages of some of the most hard-pressed workers.
John Longworth, do you think that is kind of an easing of the stays, as it were, would be acceptable in the current situation, given that the bank is now predicting 3% inflation, but that is a sort of peak, and that things should ease after that?
Well, the best way out of the debt situation for the UK economy, of course, is to get the UK economy to grow, not necessarily to follow the route of austerity. The truth of the matter is that actually by leaving the single market and the customs union, it frees the UK government up to introduce measures that it would be prevented from otherwise doing by the European Union.
And are you worried that the transition phase might kind of delay that process?
Very worried about that. In fact, it's completely wrong that we should have any transitional arrangements other than for administrative reasons. What the government should do in the November budget is set out a 5-year economic plan post-Brexit for the UK, and should start to prepare to implement those plans the moment we leave the European Union. And that will actually produce a boom in the economy and deal with the debt issue at the same time.
I don't think it's right to say that it's being in the single market that is preventing the government from investing. We've seen countries kind of across Europe taking a very different path when it comes to kind of austerity, public spending and growth. And we are now seeing, of course, the Eurozone growing at about twice the rate of the UK. I do agree with John, however, that the government needs to say what it's going to do. It does have its own responsibility, and we think it could do that during that transition period while we remain in the single market, to say how it's going to get the economy moving, how it's going to get wages rising again.
The single market membership will prevent a whole range of things that the government can do. It will be able to redeploy the net contribution, which is very considerable, 12 billion, partly into infrastructure, partly into tax cuts. It will reduce the cost of living for hard-working families by removing external tariffs and reforming the CAP, repatriating fisheries. All those sorts of things, reduction in tax, are things that the single market prevent us from doing at the moment.
But there are still things government could. But there are still things government could do. You think?
Well,
even allowing for that.
Those things will give the government the latitude to do the things it needs to do. At the moment, it is actually very constrained by its own budget and its own economic circumstances.
So the budget this year needs to address those points.
The budget this year needs to take into account the enormous range of measures that the government can introduce once we've left, that will actually give the government freedom to reflate the economy.
And briefly, Kate Bell, what should be in the budget this year?
We want to see a significant boost in investment. We want to see that boost in investment in infrastructure, and we want to take the government to take the steps that it can to invest in public services, to invest in the public servants who desperately need a pay rise.
Kate Bell of the TUC, John Longworth, formerly of the British Chambers of Commerce. Thank you both very much.